I enjoy absolutely all aspects of flying, whether it's flying a high-performance fighter, an airliner, or a very small open cockpit aircraft like this.
We're very lucky to have Dale here in the Comox Valley. He lives in Comox here with his wife and family. He built and helped build this plane during the winter at Courtney Air Park.
It's a challenge on so many different levels. You have to have discipline, you have to have some mechanical background, you have to have understanding of the elements.
Not only was he one of Canada's youngest instructors for the F-18, but Dale Earhart is now taking a plane that he helped build over to Vimy Ridge next year to help celebrate that anniversary. Dale's been a fighter pilot, test pilot. He loves everything about flying, and he's here today to explain what his role is and about the plane.
Right now we have 6 aircraft that we're planning to ship over to Vimy, France for the 100th anniversary of the Battle of Vimy and to commemorate that battle. And then we're going to ship them back to the eastern coast of Canada and fly them all the way across the country for the 150th anniversary of Confederation, as well as celebrating the 100th anniversary of the birth of a nation, literally, for the Battle of Vimy. Today's training includes bringing our last pilots up to speed. We have 10 ex-military pilots that are joining our team to fly. Some of us are airline pilots that are retired. We were all in the military before. Many of us were snowbirds or fighter pilots, or one of the other fellows is a helicopter pilot. And we've got a background in the Air Force and the Royal Canadian Navy in aviation, and we want to honor our airmen from the past.
Did you know that 2017 marks the anniversary of Vimy Ridge? You may not understand the importance, but it was the first time that all 4 battalions made a concerted effort, and they made such a landmark victory at that point that everything turned the tide and they marched on to victory from that point on. Vimy Ridge was so important that there's going to be a huge commemorative celebration next year in France. The Prime Minister will be there, the Queen will be there, and 200 classes from Canada will also be attending. I have a cousin who's in the Naval Reserve, and she's saving up her pennies to go as well.
So I was invited to join the team a year ago. And when I was invited, I didn't need to have an aircraft. I was going to be one of the extra spare pilots, but we were 1 aircraft short. So I was helping to find a new aircraft, and we were very fortunate. We found a partially completed project down in Nanaimo. I picked up the project and I worked over the last winter of doing some modifications to bring this aircraft up to a safe standard so that I could join the team with an aircraft. So this is a local aircraft that has been built here in the valley. A common question we get asked is, why is there an arrow on the lift and flying struts? These wires are called flying wires, and these are called landing wires. When the aircraft lifts off the ground, these become very taut and these actually become slightly loose. So they don't interfere and rub with each other, we lock them in together. We could have used a piece of dowel, but in the Great War they had more arrows available than dowels. So it's just a sort of a symbolic thing that is being a fighter plane that has a weapon of the arrow on. Each of our aircraft are identified not only in their colors but also in the First World War fighter pilots that were involved in our local community. And the close one for us is Charles Hickey, who was born in Parksville and raised in Nanaimo. And at the age of 18, he joined the infantry over in the Canadian Expeditionary Force over in Europe, and then quickly went over to the Royal Flying Corps and became an ace and got 21 victories before his age of 21. Sadly, he died just 2 months before the end of the war.
And the plane is also dedicated to one of our local heroes, Boomer Andrew Eichenbaum, who was killed in 2006.
It's really important that we honor more contemporary veterans and all of our servicemen today. And Andrew Eichenbaum was the first medic that was killed since the Korean War in the early years of Afghanistan. So as an honor to him as a local hero, I wanted to make sure that his name was emblazoned on the aircraft as well.
So you were telling me about some of the different parts that went into including dirt bike tires, etc., and actually seems quite basic for a plane that's going to fly in the air.
So these aircraft were very simple craft in the First World War. They were made out of linen fabric and dope, which was highly flammable, a lot of wooden components, and they were very fragile. They used to call them kites or crates, and they were highly flammable, and many of the pilots were injured or killed in training, never mind in combat. This is a replica made with modern materials. So this aircraft, even though this is painted to look like wood, is made out of 6061 T6 aluminum, which is a very high calibrated aircraft material. All these components are aircraft components, modern aircraft components, but the aircraft is still very simple. Instead of using the original Gnome engine, which is a rotary engine, that would be so unreliable and difficult to keep operating today, we've actually used a derivative of the Volkswagen engine. And it's a 4-cylinder air-cooled engine designed for aircraft. The brakes and wheels we're talking about, when the aircraft was flown over in France, they didn't fly off runways, they flew off square fields. So they could always take off into wind. They didn't have a tail wheel, they had a wooden skid. And so what would happen to taxi is they would pull the stick back and the skid would dig into the dirt and that would slow them down. If they wanted to go forward, they would move the stick forward, which would lift the tail, and they could maneuver around the field. Unfortunately, to go on a hard surface like Courtney Airpark, we need a tail wheel. But when you put a tail wheel on one of these airplanes, it's a little bit like Bambi on ice. So now you need brakes, and it's ideal to have differential braking so that can assist in the steering. We have a steerable tail wheel as well as brakes. To keep these components light, because the aircraft is so small, it's mountain bike brakes that we've adapted and very light enduro motorcycle rims that try to make it look realistic by putting a skin over the top, but still has modern materials. The gun on the top is a Lewis machine gun, and it was one of the very early adaptations. Later they found a way to synchronize the bullets to go through the propeller so the machine gun was lined up more with the pilot's sight. But in the early part of the war, the pilots would use something like this as their crosshairs, and they would align the gun to that, and that's how they would line up to shoot down the enemy. The magazine on the top only held about 36 shells, so if they had to leave the fight, they literally had to stand up, steer with their knees, tilt the gun back and change the magazine while they're being shot at and trying to fly, and then put it back into position. The trigger was brought down through a cable into the cockpit.
Oh my goodness.
The gentleman who designed this aircraft's plans, someone had actually suggested it's more of a book of ideas. They're fairly primitive plans that they only gave about a page and a half on how to build the wing, but he had 7 pages on how to build that wooden machine gun replica. So he was obviously a bit of a historical buff and trying to make sure that that machine gun looked right. Basically, it's all about managing risk. And those challenges I find intriguing and something that I think you just have to do to really appreciate.
So we wish Dale good weather, good health, and happy flying. From the Comox Valley, this is Judi Murakami for Shaw TV.
My name's Robert Randall.
So Robert, tell me the story about your grandmother.
Well, they came from England in 1907. My grandfather, he was an engineer in England, mechanical engineer. They thought they'd come to Canada for a better life, and his brother was a farmer over here in Saskatchewan. So they came over and stayed with them in about 1907. The war came about 1914-ish, and my grandmother was very patriotic. She felt it was her duty to go back to the homeland and help out where she could. So she packed the 6 kids up, caught the steamboat back to England, and worked for Sopwith Camel Company.
And explain what that was.
Well, it's a company, I think the company was called Whitehead Aviation. And the Sopwith, they were contracted to build Sopwith aircraft for the war effort. And she started working in the plant. My grandfather started working in the plant as well, in the engineering department. And my grandmother and her crew used to sew the canvas on the wings and the fuselage of the aircraft. And I have pictures of her sitting on the barrel with her partners around her working away. As the war progressed, she joined the RAF and became a pay clerk and was looking after about 900 Air Force staff, and she rose to the rank of chief warrant officer. My grandfather, he went on to help with the Sopwith Camel, and after the war, I think it was about 1919, they packed up again and came back to Canada, and that's where the rest of the family started. I followed my grandmother's footsteps through the years, and then my father, I have a picture of my grandmother dressed in her World War I uniform, pinning something on my father and sent him off to the Second World War in the Air Force. So I decided that as I grew older, I would join the Air Force.
From the Comox Valley, this is Judi Murakami for Shaw TV.
My name is Carl Seidel.
And Carl, tell us about these masonry heaters. What are they?
Sure, so a masonry heater is a very efficient wood-burning heating source where you make 1 or 2 fires a day, and the mass of the heater absorbs the heat and slowly radiates it out for the remainder of the day.
And I've touched the sides. It's quite hot. How hot does it get?
So around the fire chamber could get maybe around 90 degrees Celsius, but the rest of the heater is usually just about 60 degrees or so. It usually retains that heat though throughout the whole time, so it's not like a metal stove where it gets very hot and then cools down extremely fast. This will retain its heat and slowly radiate it out. This particular brick is a North American refractory brick, so we do not use this material because it's very dense, it's not porous, and the composition of it is that it reflects the heat rather than absorbs it. So you can see this material, for instance, that comes in various sizes. It's a lot more porous, and it's a different composition of metals as well, but it's still clay-based. It's all natural. It's all natural clay-based material.
So what makes a masonry heater different than a wood stove?
So the entirety of the heater is made out of a special refractory brick, which is specially designed to store the heat and slowly radiate it out. We're talking about 1 or 2 metric tons of mass, that's thermal mass, right? So we also have much higher burn temperatures, so about 900 degrees Celsius. And instead of all that heat going straight through the chimney, it's being absorbed in the mass. And by the time it gets to the chimney connection, you'll have maybe about 200 degrees. So that differential is stored and slowly comes out. We incorporate an air gap between the external shell and the internal channels for 2 reasons. First off, that you have a more consistent air temperature everywhere, so you get consistent surface temperature on the outside, but mostly because we don't want contact between the two, because otherwise you might get friction when the expansion happens, and then you can get cracks. So
This technology is available in Austria, so why did you decide to bring it over to Canada?
Well, no one else does it here, right? We have so much wood, but we're not really burning it efficiently. You're always seeing just everyone has wood smoke billowing out of their house, and it's unnecessary. You can see right now that this fire is burning quite hot. It's going to reach upwards of 900 degrees Celsius. But if you were to go outside and see the chimney, there's nothing coming out because it's burning so efficiently.
That's right, because when we pulled up, we couldn't smell anything.
Yeah. And that's the whole thing. When it's designed so that it has the complete combustion, so the most amount of air, turbulence, and give it the time to burn fast. There's no damper, it's only on or off, so you can't damper it down and suffocate it. It has to be a full combustion.
From the Comox Valley, this is Judi Murakami for Shaw TV.